The Nathaniel Dett Chorale has celebrated 25 years of success singing Afrocentric programming in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Here to tell us about it is their founding artistic director, Brainerd Blyden-Taylor. Welcome, Brainerd. Thank you so much for joining us in the spotlight.
Lovely to be with you, Eric. Thank you so very much for having me on the program.
So please tell us about the Nathaniel Dett Chorale. How large is it? How long have you been singing and that sort of thing?
Well, glad you asked. I founded the ensemble in 1998. I had been sort of trying to get it up and off the ground for a few years before that. And, just looking at the choral landscape in Toronto and across Canada, I guess the burden was laid on my heart that something like the Nathaniel Dett Chorale was needed, an ensemble that would specialize in Afrocentric choral music, that would dedicate itself to doing that. It's not, of course, the only thing that we do. When we work with other ensembles, we do other musics, but when we do our own programming, that's what we focus on. And the ensemble is between 20 and 24, plus a collaborative pianist. And then we work with, different other instrumentations, whether it's a sort of a jazz gospel combo or jazz quintet or string quartet or orchestras or whatever is necessary for the musics that we're doing. But that has been our focus. And it was wonderful to name it after Robert Nathaniel Dett. I, was fairly clear when I was forming it that I didn't want to name it after myself, and I wanted to try to honor Black history, Canadian history, and music history, sort of in the naming, and was pointed in the direction of Robert Nathaniel Dett, and after doing some research, decided he was an appropriate person to honor with the naming. So there you go.
It's wonderful. Now, this is a professional choir, is that correct?
It is correct. That's correct.
So all members are paid and they sing for their job.
That's right. That's right. So we pay them an hourly wage for rehearsals and performances. And when we tour, the organization is responsible for paying daily per diems and taking care of hotel and travel, and so it can get a little costly. But
And when you tour, do you come this side of the border as well?
We have been to the United States on several occasions, and we have been to France on one occasion, and we were invited and had made plans to be in Kyoto in Japan for one of the world symposiums on choral music. But sadly, our Foreign Affairs Department, a month before we were to depart, told us they had no money for us, and we were not able to raise what it would take. So we sadly had to decline at the last minute. But yes, we try to travel as widely as we can, and we have. Across Canada, we've been just about to every part of Canada now, and we've been to several states in the U.S., yes.
It's wonderful. And how many concerts typically make up a concert season for your chorale?
Well, part of our Toronto season, because we are funded by the Toronto Arts Council, the Ontario Arts Council, and the Canada Council for the Arts. So we get municipal, provincial, and federal funding. And part of that requires us to do a minimum of 3 concerts in Toronto. So we do that. And then the rest of our season is made up with various what we call runouts or touring. I mean, we work with other organizations. We do collaborations. I mean, it's been wonderful to come and collaborate with you in the Rochester Oratorio Society. This coming fall will make our 5th year collaborating with Opera Atelier, which is a wonderful company here that mostly does Baroque opera, and with dance and singers and members of the Tafelmusik Baroque Orchestra. And we have been, we've had the good pleasure of being their chorus for the last 4 years. This coming fall will be our 5th season performing with them. And I think this fall we're doing Mozart's Magic Flute with them. So
wonderful.
Normally we sit in boxes, hidden away. And but this year I hear we're supposed to be on stage, so we'll see what happens.
Wonderful.
But so it can vary with runouts and with touring. We can easily add, another, 10 to 20 performances sometimes in a year.
Wonderful. Now, Afrocentric music, meaning
Yes.
music by African composers or Afro-Canadian composers? Who were we talking?
Well, when I first started the ensemble, that term wasn't being used too widely. So in 1998, when we did our media launch, and we said to the public, we're going to specialize in Afrocentric choral music, and people said, "Well, what is that exactly?"
Yeah.
And they said, "I want you to give myself a large enough sandbox in which to play," and I didn't want to say we would only do the music of Black composers, because even though that's what we mostly do, I felt that was limiting in a certain way. And by Afrocentric, it sort of encompasses music by composers of African heritage, but it also allows me to perform music that has been heavily influenced by African heritage traditions. So whether that's the text to which the songs are written, or the musical style, jazz or something like that, or mostly those things. But sometimes it can be, influenced by visual art or other sort of styles or traditions, idioms that are of African heritage. And I usually say to people, for instance, there is a Canadian female composer by the name of Ruth Watson Henderson, and we have done her setting of The Creation, which is a poem by James Weldon Johnson that forms part of his poetic cycle called God's Trombones. And she called her setting of it "Make Me a World," because that's where the poem goes. It says, "And God stepped out in space and he looked around and said, 'I'm lonely. I'll make me a world.'" So she called her setting "Make Me a World." But I remember when she was composing it, she reached out to me and she says, this choir in Galesburg, Illinois, asked me to set this piece for them. And she goes, "I don't entirely understand some of the language in this poetry. I feel like the poem's forcing me out of my normal compositional style." So then we started to talk about the poem and what some of the the meanings might be that were inferred in the poem. So things like that. So that I consider an Afrocentric, choral composition.
Understood.
And yeah.
Understood. So now, have you recorded these works, and where can people hear more of this music?
We have not done a lot of recordings. We've recorded some of Nathaniel Dett's music. That was one of the very first things that we did, because particularly here in Canada, most people had no idea who Nathaniel Dett was and what his music sounded like. And And we've got a Christmas recording. There was a company here that did a documentary about us and the founding of the chorus called "Carry Me Home," and they used that title based on the Chariot Jubilee, because it's based on the spiritual "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot coming for to carry me home," and they did the documentary from the perspective of us sort of repatriating Robert Nathaniel Dett, because again, Canadians didn't realize that, you know, he was born and raised in Canada, and that even though he spent most of his adult life living and teaching in the United States, that he very much kept his relationship with Canada, and when he passed, that his body was returned to Canada to be buried alongside his mother and his older brothers. So, you know, we can at least claim him in birth and early life, and certainly in death. And so I wanted Canadians to know a little bit about that. And the documentary was well received. We've got a few YouTube videos currently, some of them with music of Moses Hogan, some of his spirituals, and one of them in particular is a lovely setting of Abide With Me by a jazz musician and educator by the name of Greg Jaspers. But in the coming 5 years, this is something that I'm wanting to do more with the ensemble, because I'm beginning to feel legacy thoughts. You know, I'm not getting any younger, and as I'm thinking of finding someone else who can sort of pick up the torch and carry it forward. I was just actually talking to our recording engineer, the person that has recorded us the most, about going through the archives and putting some of the music, on our website, and wanting to also put some of the programs, the titles of the programs that we've done over we're now going on 30 years. Put them up there so that people can see, how we've strung certain things together, and so it's a plan for the next 5 years. But we also did one recording called the Nguzo Saba Suite, which was written by Glenn Edward Burley, and that we recorded that entire suite. Which is based on the 7 principles that comprise the festival of Kwanzaa, which is celebrated from December 26th to January the 1st. But they are really principles that were at the heart and founding of the chorale in 1998, and are the kinds of principles that I feel I was invited to live by, and I feel that people of African heritage are invited to live by. And it is another aspect, I think, of what informs that term Afrocentric, because I think through the music we can talk about a world view and a way of being that, is supported by those 7 principles.
So you mentioned the Chariot Jubilee, and that's music by Robert Nathaniel Dett. That's the namesake of your chorale. And for those who may not be familiar with him at all, please tell us a little bit more about your namesake.
Well, I mean, he was born in what we now know as Niagara Falls, Ontario, in 1882. And sort of went to high school there, grew up there, and then shortly after he graduated from high school, I think he was living on the New York side of the border, and was working at the Cataract Hotel, which actually is celebrating, I think, this year and into next year, rather significant anniversary milestone, and we may be getting together with folks to help celebrate that on both sides of the border. We understand that there were sort of tunnels and other things from the Cataract Hotel on the New York side of the border coming to the Canadian side of the border, and certainly it was very much involved in the Underground Railroad. But Nathaniel Dett was discovered, quote unquote, by someone while he was playing the piano in the lobby of the Cataracts Hotel, who supported him to go to Oberlin, in Ohio. And to the best of my knowledge, I believe he was the first Black man to graduate from Oberlin with first-class honors in piano, organ, and composition, and went on to distinguish himself teaching at several what we call HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. And he's credited with particularly formalizing the School of Music at Hampton University in Virginia and the Musical Arts Society there. And he took the choir from Hampton on a 6-week tour of Europe in 1930 and sort of helped to blow their minds a little bit with the sound that of the spiritual and the sound that he had created. And I think he wrote sort of 2 treatises about that trip. One, harking back to his days as a bellboy at the Cataracts Hotel, was called From Bell Stand to Throne Room, because I think on that trip they had actually performed for the Queen of Belgium at least once, maybe twice. And the other sort of essay that he had written about it was called The Musical Invasion of Europe. Wonderful stories about that. But like I said, he kept his relationship with Canada, and, he wrote, various pieces of music, one particularly that we love called Oh Holy Lord, which he wrote for his friend Bruce Carey, who conducted what is now called the Bach-Elgar Choir in Hamilton, Ontario, a little bit a ways from Toronto, was then called the Elgar Choir. And as I mentioned, when Nathaniel Dett died in 1943, his body was returned to Ontario to be buried alongside his mother and his older brothers. At the time of his birth, the community in which he was born was not known as Niagara Falls, Ontario at the time, because there were a series of smaller sort of Underground Railroad communities. The Lundy's Lane community, and the community in which he was born in was called Drummondville. And there have been some sort of musicologists who have gotten the geography a bit incorrect, because they think of Drummondville and they talk about it, close to Vermont, which is Drummondville, Quebec, which is near the Vermont border. But Drummondville, Ontario, which is harder to find unless you look at an old ordnance map of the area.
Oh.
Drummondville, Ontario, along with Lundy's Lane and Simcoe, have all sort of amalgamated many, many years ago to form what we now know as Niagara Falls, Ontario. So, yeah.
So he was the grandson of people who made the trek to freedom up along the Underground Railroad.
Yes, that's what we think. His maternal grandmother, moved into the area, and she's actually buried, I think, in the Lundy's Lane Cemetery, which is a different cemetery from where Nathaniel Dett's mother and his brothers are buried. That's where I think he realized in later life where he got, where his ear was attuned to the spiritual, was from listening to his grandmother hum and sing some of these songs. And, as he studied more in the United States and met people who, were more closely connected to slavery in that period, begun to realize that the wealth the deep well that the spiritual was, and saw it as, this wonderful folk music of America and of North America, in general, that could be explored or mined to form larger works, which he did and did very successfully in terms of anthems and cantatas and oratorios.
And he was something of a Renaissance man, being an author and an illustrator as well as a pianist and conductor and composer.
Yes, he was. And, I've just gone through this incredible exercise with the Arts Councils, creating multi-year grants, and with the Canada Council in particular. So I've just had to come up with programming through the 2029-2030 season. And
wow.
We have actually, we're actually planning a program, I think 3 seasons from now, that we're calling the Dett Poets Society.
Well done. Well done.
Well, and the thing is, George Eliot Clark, who at one time was the poet laureate for the city of Toronto, this was a man who was born in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and is currently the E.J. Pratt Professor of African Canadian Literature at the University of Toronto. He and I were talking about, about a few of these things, and he reminded me that he had collated a book several years ago that he called Locating Home. And in it, he referenced the first novel by an African Canadian. And he also referenced the first collection of poetry by an African Canadian. And that poet was Robert Nathaniel Dett, The Album of the Heart. He was the person who, as far as anyone can tell, was the first person of African heritage to create a collection of poems and publish them, because I think it was published in 1911. It's called The Album of the Heart. And so, yes, he and this other, I believe it's a female, whose name I cannot remember at the moment, who was the first African-Canadian novelist. But George Eliot Clark sort of referenced and put their works forward in this book, Locating Home.
Locating Home. Yeah, Album of the Heart is a splendid thing to read if people can find that.
It truly is.
Yeah.
And I mean, not only did he write these wonderful poems, I mean, he set some of them to music for, and I know there's particularly for the solo voice, and that's a recording that's in the offing. There is an organization in Toronto that's wanting to record all his music for the solo voice as well. And we had a colleague called Dr. Clipper Erickson, who researched and recorded all of Dett's piano music, and a lovely 2-volume CD called My Cup Runneth Over.
Clipper Erickson, yes.
Clipper Erickson. I think he did his thesis on Nathaniel Dett's piano music at Temple University, and he's a white man who decided he wanted to do his doctoral thesis on Dett's piano music, and of course many of his colleagues tried to deter him. Why would you even consider doing this? I mean, like, this is your career that we're talking about. And he goes, well, why not him?
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting, Brainerd. Every time we sing a piece of Nathaniel Dett's here in Rochester. Someone comes out of the
Yes.
audience and said, "Oh, my grandfather studied with him," or "My father studied with him," because he taught and lived here in Rochester and directed church choirs. You're
yes.
very connected to our community as well. So I wanted to hear, now, are you creating new work for your choir along the lines of your standard collection of repertoire? Are you generating new music as well?
We still are. That's one of the things that motivates me, not just discovering, quote unquote, discovering pieces of music by people like Nathaniel Dett, our Nathaniel Dett, or, as I just mentioned, Samuel Coleridge Taylor and folks that have, written that type of music. But over the years, we have commissioned new works. Just this past February, we finally gave the world premiere of the whole God's Trombones cycle. So this was text that was written by James Weldon Johnson. I think he published it in 1927. So, we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of that, the release of the text itself. But we've over the years had a wonderful relationship with an African Canadian concert pianist and composer by the name of Stuart Goodyear, and we have been working to realize this project for quite a while, and finally Stuart set all 8 movements of this poetic cycle. So there's 7 Negro sermons in verse form. And the first poem is a prayer, which would, in the typical Black church, before the preacher gets into the pulpit, the prayer leader would say a prayer calling God's blessings down on the preacher. So these are very iconic sermons along the line of the creation, which I mentioned earlier, the prodigal son, there's a funeral sermon, there's a Judgment Day sermon, things like that. And it opens with this prayer. The poem is called "Listen, Lord, a Prayer." And so we just had the good pleasure to perform that in February, and we're hoping to take it to Baylor University in February of 2027. Partly to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the text, but also as part of a residency that we're beginning next February with Dr. Stephen Newby at Baylor University. This is part of he holds the chair in Black worship, and he's wanting to look at the diversity of Black worship. I think the gospel music archives are also at Baylor University. Stephen Newby is also someone who's written music for us. He wrote a cantata based on the book of Hosea in the Old Testament that we've done. And next February, we're going to be doing the world premiere of a jazz suite called Virtues, which is being written for us by Jesse Ryan, for his jazz quintet and for the Odin String Quartet and ourselves. So
wonderful. Actually, we'd love to hear more, but we're out of time at the moment. And thank you so much for telling us about nearly 30 years of success with the Nathaniel Dett Chorale of Toronto, Ontario, Canada. We've been speaking to their founding artistic director, Brainerd Blyden-Taylor. Thank you so much for joining me in the spotlight today, Brainerd. Great to see you.
You're very, very welcome, Eric. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.